Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 4th chapter in the book of Proverbs. And before we cover the targeted focal point, we just need to establish the narrative context. The first 9 chapters in the book of Proverbs forms the first section. Proverbs, unlike the majority of the New Old Testament, I think some 60% of it is arranged in narrative format, and that is all the characteristics that entails, namely plot development and character interaction. The first 9 chapters are as close as Proverbs get to the narrative form. They all have definite themes, whereas that which comes after it, it's not uncommon to that the verse that you read has no conceptual connection to either its predecessor or successor. They are arranged almost arbitrarily, but the ones in the first 9 chapters stick to a theme. So the 4th chapter is the trio of a trilogy, which begins in the second, and the theme of that one is the moral benefits of wisdom. I'll just read 2 verses 11 and 12. Discretion will guard you, understanding will watch over you, to deliver you from the evil ways, from the man who speaks perversities. So, wisdom, of which he elaborates more fully on even in the first chapter, the Proverbs belongs into the genre of wisdom literature, and wisdom is personified in female form in this. But one of the benefits is that it not only enhances your intellectual knowledge, but your moral response will be more correct. You will stay away from the evil way. We're going to read of the evil way. We don't know if we'll have enough time to get into it in the 4th chapter, but it's basically the way of darkness and the way of death. So that is one of the moral benefits of having wisdom. The 3rd chapter continues by giving additional benefits of wisdom. And the theme of the 4th chapter is the supremacy of wisdom. We'll deal with the additional ones first before we cover in greater detail the supremacy chapter. My son, do not forget my law, and let your heart watch over my commands. For length of days and long lives and peace they add to you. So length of days, long life, and peace are 3 of the benefits of wisdom, and it's an oversimplification. Now, a wise person will tend to their health and their welfare, and they will have a better shot at prolonging their life than one who is unwise, but it's not an automatic guarantee. Sometimes free will and just intervenes. But long life, that's not necessarily guaranteed. The path of wisdom will not necessarily add years to your life, but they will add life to your years. There's a qualitative enhancement, and when we speak of the quality of life, by that measure, the Christian has a different standard for the quality of life than the world does. And peace, that is the Hebrew word shalom. Peace is an understatement. We don't have a more profound word in the English language. The Hebrew word shalom indicates more than the cessation of conflict. It represents a state of material and temporal and spiritual, certainly, but often temporal prosperity. And it's just the inner serenity that is not guaranteed by the peace as we understand the term. Verses 13 through 18, I'm just going to read them in the list. Blessed is the man who found wisdom and the man who gets understanding, for the gain from it is better than silver, and its increase than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all your delights are not comparable to her. Length of days is in her right hand, riches and esteem are in her left hand. Her ways are pleasant ways, and her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those taking hold of her, and blessed are those who retain her. Now, the first thing we need to establish is the her is wisdom personified in human form, and the price and the treasure and the value is beyond monetary calculation. There is no items of the earth that can stack up as high as you want, and it's not going to add up to the benefit of having wisdom. It's the length of days is once more repeated. Riches and esteem not guaranteed, but the old covenant system was one of rewards for righteousness, rewards and punishment. And her ways are pleasant, and it's more pleasant than to pursue the path of immediate gratification, to dig in the dirt and put in the work to gain wisdom. and all her paths are peace. So the wise life leads to an existence of peace, and a tree of life, it is the source of life. It adds meaning to life and enables us to unlock the meaning. Wisdom is a precious, precious tool to have, indispensable for the Christian. And so we've said enough about what comes before it. Now we're just going to hop into the lesson itself. And remember, the theme of the 4th chapter is the supremacy of wisdom. What comes after it is the dominant trilogy theme is the warnings and enticings of the adulterer, chapters 5 through 7. 6 opens with, it compares the ways of wisdom and folly. But then it has another indictment. But that's neither here nor there. First verse, 4th chapter, lesson itself, book of Proverbs. Children, listen to the discipline of a father, and give attention to no understanding. So he's addressing this is a tutorial book for fathers to son. This was his guide for wise royal rulership that he wrote for his son, but it's also applicable. Fathers should teach this to their children, and the children should not despise the discipline of the father as long as it is because Yahweh disciplines those he loves. So we should not despise. And he has much to say about the benefits of discipline. It is also a mark of the wise, to connect it to the wisdom literature category, to embrace discipline and to not run away from it, but rather... And, you have to know understanding, you have to pay attention, but paying attention is not enough. You have to have the ability to understand what you are paying attention to, but added concentration on any item of subject is bound to enhance the parameters of one's knowledge of it. For I gave you good instructions, do not forsake my law. So the instructions are good, and the consequences for forsaking the law are bad. We don't know quite what they are, but we do know from the wider Old Testament, some of the punishments and warnings and consequences for forsaking the law. If they forsook the law, the lawmaker was covenantally bound to not completely forsake them, but at least remove them from the promised land, because he gave them good instructions in the writings of Moses and the prophets and the wisdom literature, of which we are now reading. For I was my father's son, tender and the only one in the eyes of my mother. His father was David, the lion monarch, the standard monarch of righteous rule, a man described as a man even after, by God himself, as a man after his own heart. And his mother would have been Bathsheba, which incidentally represents David's weak point, his chief moral failing. We can read of this in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. 11 for the sin, 12 for the consequences. And then Psalm 51 was written in response to his repentance of it. And one of the first things, the first child that they conceived, because she was bathing after her menstruation period, she would have been ripe for conception when who happens to look at the palace but David himself, and she seduces him with his eyes. He invites her in, seduces her, and impregnates her, and it just leads to one of the Proverbs I frequently connect that story to is Proverbs 18:9. He who is an idler is a brother or a companion, depending on the translation, of a great destroyer. So it was springtime, the time when kings go to war, but David stayed home in Jerusalem. David sent the boys off, and he was just going to take this one back. So for all intents and purposes, he was derelict in his duty as God's anointed. And he wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble sure enough found him, and we should know where the story ends. If not, read the chapters I earlier referenced. But he would have been the only child, and he would have been the child destined to inherit the throne because David had multiple wives, but Bathsheba and Solomon were her favorite wives and son. Then he taught me and said to me, let my heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. So the commandments are a life source. They enable us, they sustain us to live. They were the maintenance, the keeping of them were the maintenance policy for remaining in the promised land, which some 400 years after Solomon, the Jews would be expelled and exiled to Babylon. let your heart hold fast my words. So the heart, it can be translated as mind. There's some confusion. The ancients, at least Aristotle, thought that the center of cognitive activity was the human heart. So, I have read it translated as mind. We just want to hold both options open. But, the main thing is to hold them, never let go, do not forsake them, and you will live abundantly on earth and eternally in heaven. Get wisdom, get understanding, do not forget, and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. So the word get has a commercial connotation, and remember we already how in the earlier chapter the exceeding preciousness of wisdom in comparison to any earthly item or treasure. And so the temptation to turn away from the words of his mouth are literally all around us. The world is a siren of competing voices with contradictory claims and different promises, different deceptions, different manipulations. But if we stick to the word that emanates from the mouth of God himself, then we will not go astray. We have to value wisdom above all else, because remember, wisdom is supreme. That is the theme of this chapter. Do not leave her, and let her guard you. Love her, and let her watch over you. So the Torah, the law of Moses, is connected to wisdom, and it is wisdom in the sense that it is the expression of the will and character of the wisest of all beings, the omniscient one. But the her, once more, is wisdom. So wisdom is the sister of the spirit of the Torah, and is alternately a sister or a wife even to Yahweh. But we don't want to. The ancients weren't as obsessed with gender as we moderns are. They didn't think too much of it. We can get ourselves trapped in a mind maze just trying to decipher what Lady Wisdom's relationship to God is, and it ultimately, and in the final analysis, doesn't matter. I think it is an extension of God, but not God himself, because he has more than just the attribute of wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is get wisdom, and with all your getting, get understanding. So the foundational launching pad to getting wisdom is to get it, and to get it you have to take the steps, you have to plan the path, you have to take the path, you have to chart your way there, and wisdom will be the resource and the commodity which enables you to finish the race and get to the determined destination. But keep getting it. Don't with all you're getting, keep getting more. Do not be content or satisfied to rest on the wisdom of today or even yesterday. Always be expanding your arsenal of wisdom indefinitely and inexorably. Exalt her, and let her uplift you. She brings you esteem when you embrace her. So how we treat wisdom is how she's going to treat us. If we misuse her, misrepresent her, abuse her, or exploit her, then we will be humbled, because ultimately we are assaulting God himself, because he is wisdom herself. He is her. Again, we're not going to get in the gender mind maze. But the point of being, if you take one step towards her, she will lift you 2 steps over. And the uplifting has a salvific connotation. Uplifting, we are ascended to heaven from earth, where we no longer live, but now when we live in heaven. She brings you esteem when she gives your head a wreath of esteem. She shields you with an adorning crown. So these are the rewards, a crown and a wreath. These would have belonged to the victorious contestant in an ancient athletic contest. The Greeks gave them wreaths that the winner wore, and crown would have been the hat or the head covering of the king. And he is so wisdom exalts even the lowliest of her servants to royalty, because wisdom is more powerful than any earthly might. Hear, my son, and accept my words, and let the years of your life be many. So he's saying here, and in the Hebrew language, a lot of the words we heard, remember we expanded on the peace, how limited our language is, right? And we just want to be mindful of the original language. A lot of times when you read hear or listen, it means there is a Hebrew word that means not only absorb, but obey, and thus become it. So the hearing, it's not limited to listening alone, but extends to doing. And we can accept the words by putting them into practice and living them out in your life. And the blessed consequence of this, the after effect, the reward, is that the years of our life will be many. We will have a quality life, if not necessarily a quantity life, but even all our years will be pleasant, because her ways are pleasant. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in straight paths. So from a father's standpoint, he had a good report card. Realistically and tragically, Rehoboam, assuming this was the one to whom it was written, did not make the most of his father's wisdom. It's not the same man that his father was, but his father was not to blame. Proverbs 22:6, train a child up in the way of righteousness, and he will not astray when he grows. That's a paraphrase, but the principle is invalidated not only by Rehoboam but Solomon himself. Eventually, by the 11th chapter of Kings, he just succumbs. This whole new character of him emerges, this idolater and this concubine collector, and of foreign wives who lead him astray. But he did have the foundation and the wisdom instilled in him by David and Bathsheba. When you walk, your steps shall not be hindered, and if you run, you shall not stumble. So one of the effects of living in wisdom is that we will have life. Our life journey will only get lighter and lighter, whereas those who live without wisdom are in darkness and confusion and doubt. But we do not suffer from the same dilemma, and the hindrance are the potential obstacles. Now, we will have trials. We are not called up for a trouble-free life. When we become a Christian, the Savior offers no illusions. He advises us to count the cost before we come to him, but it is discipleship, and the rewards thereof are truly a treasure beyond any earthly measure, much like wisdom itself. And if you have a plan to the destination, you're not going to stumble on your way over. You're going to be able to keep your integrity from start to finish. Hold fast to discipline. Do not let go. Watch over her, for she is your life. So hold and not letting go, this is the sense of feeling. And watch over her, that just means watch her all the time. Do not let her out of your sight. And because if you do that, you might just lose your life, because wisdom is connected to not only life itself, but the quality of the experiences therein. And we got to treat her accordingly, and don't run away prematurely before the discipline has accomplished its purpose. We're actually going to divide this into two sections because there's 27 verses. We want to give each verse its appropriate attention, and the only way we can do that is to stop it now. But this is what will give us a little sneak preview. The way of the wicked, which is the way of darkness and sin and doubt and confusion, is once more presented. I mentioned it without reading it in the second chapter. So maybe we'll review that as our preamble to this when we do it next time. But that's all the time we have for right now. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.